We're really just inheriting this chain that's been passed, that gets passed down through institutions, through theology, through hymns, through practices and rituals. So if we do nothing, we're inheriting what's essentially a Christianity that was built to protect white supremacy.
And I'd love for you to explain a little bit about the relationship here between white supremacy and American Christianity. What does that connection look like to you?
Yeah, when you really look at the history straight on, without flinching, what you see is that white Christian churches have actually been the central legitimizing force behind white supremacy throughout American history. They were Christianity, and certainly white Christians were at the top of the political and cultural power for almost all of the country's life. And Christianity got wrapped up in whiteness. It got wrapped up in power. And the challenge, I think, for us is that DNA got built into white Christianity by decision after decision after decision for generation to protect white supremacy and to have Christianity be the thing that legitimized it in the country and even sacralized it. We're really just inheriting this chain that's been passed, that gets passed down through institutions, through theology, through hymns, through practices and rituals. So if we do nothing, we're inheriting what's essentially a Christianity that was built to protect white supremacy.
What does it actually look like on the ground to say that there is a connection between white supremacy and American Christianity?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example from my hometown. So First Baptist Church, Jackson, Mississippi. It was one of the most prominent pastors in evangelicalism in the 1950s and 1960s was the pastor of First Baptist Church, Douglas Hudgens in Jackson. And, if you read his sermons from the 50s and 60s, you would have no idea that there was a civil rights movement going on. You would have no idea that there was any injustice in the society around them along lines of race or violence along lines of race. I mean, these are through, lynchings, through, denying people their rights, holding up a segregated society, protecting white schools from being integrated. I mean, all of this stuff. And sermon after sermon, what would happen is the sermons would really be about a personal relationship with Jesus. And there's a way in which that construction as the central part of what it means to be Christian screens out any claims to social justice. It screens out anything that might be dismissed as politics and something that we over here in the church shouldn't be mixed up in. But what it means is that the white supremacist status quo gets to thrive, and Christianity has been circumscribed into this small box that's really about personal piety that is divorced and quarantined from any claims to justice on the outside.
Here's a question. I know your organization, Public Religion Research Institute, it does a lot of work around data and mapping and surveying. And so what does the current data say about how big of a problem white supremacy still is within white Christian circles?
My day job at data around American religion and politics is that it's no surprise to anyone that the religion most associated with the cultural South, that is white evangelicalism, has this legacy built into it. That's maybe not the surprise, but I was surprised at how deeply the connection was between white mainline Protestants and white Catholics, in the book as well. So, just some political data, and I'll give you some other things. But it's worth noting, like everybody talks a lot about white evangelicals supporting President Trump at 81% in 2016, but I think people forget that white mainline Protestants also voted for President Trump, 57%, and white Catholics voted for Trump at 64%. So there's that tight connection there. And then, on questions that are like right at the heart of what we're talking about now, and the protests and calls for justice around policing, we have a question that we've asked for a number of years, that whether the killing of unarmed Black men are isolated incidents, or are they part of a pattern of how police treat African Americans. And we ask that question, and you look at white Americans, white Christians, whether they are white evangelical, white mainline, or white Catholic, all are on the side of saying, no, these events are isolated incidents. They're not connected. There's no structural connection to them. But if you look at whites who are not Christian, they are actually much closer to African Americans' views, who's saying, no, actually, this is part of a broader pattern of how police treat African Americans. It's a structural justice issue. And I think you can see it, question after question after question around racial issues, that you see this pattern with whites who are Christian, actually are more likely than whites who are not Christian to be fairly blind to these issues of race, and particularly structural racism. So again, Christianity's had this effect compared to non-Christian whites of actually making them further away from the views of African Americans than whites who are not Christian. So I think those patterns are really there. You see it on the Confederate flag. You see it on questions about whether or not past discrimination still has an impact in the present. I mean, on and on and on and on.